During my career as a surgeon, Solange served as an emergency room nurse, balancing her time between work and her travels. Throughout our experiences in diverse and demanding locations across Africa, we adapted to whichever roles were required at the time. We delivered babies, set broken bones, and even assisted the local dentist when needed. This was my second mission, and her third with Doctors Without Borders. The first time was incredibly tough on me physically and mentally. I lost 20 pounds, which I really couldn't afford, and I struggled with depression almost to the point of losing my mind. When I finally got home, I counted the seconds until I could collapse into my husband's arms and cry hysterically for 10 minutes. Then I gathered myself and hugged and kissed my then 7-year-old son until he almost pushed me away. I soon noticed my husband was a bit distant towards me in the first few days after my return. It seemed he held a lot of resentment about me going away in the first place. I remember the tense discussions we had about it. Let someone else handle saving the world, honey. You have people here at home who need you more. People are passing. People I could save. You save plenty of lives right here at home, and you get to sleep in our own bed without worrying about being attacked. It's not that dangerous. I'll be in a secure area, and I can help far more people there than I could here. Want me to pull up some statistics for you? Sometimes I resented his job. He was a meticulous freelance writer who started small but now wrote for major newspapers and magazines, even winning awards. With a friend's help, he launched a successful YouTube channel, gaining almost 2 million subscribers. He even contributed to CNN with lighthearted pieces. Our niece explained that he had become an influencer, a term he didn't understand. After researching, he made a video urging people to verify information and think for themselves. It took him 5 months to accept my decision to leave, and another 3 months before I actually departed. He remained distant. I'll be back home before you know it, I said, but his sad eyes haunted me. Nothing will ever be the same. I won't trust you to prioritize our family again. This is your only warning. If you abandon your family again, there won't be one when you return. His words hit hard as he took our crying baby from my arms and walked away without looking back. I was sent to a rural African country that was quite underdeveloped outside of the cities. My operating room was a tent, not securely pitched. During the summer, strong winds often disrupted operations, covering everything in dust when the tent flaps flew open. It's surprising we didn't lose patients to infections. Still, we managed to save many lives. I helped deliver 4 babies during my time there, including one for a young mother barely past puberty. After recovering, she left her baby, took her rifle, and disappeared. Rumors spread of a vengeance force, then multiple angels, causing the insurgents to leave the area. After 3 months, I was feeling trapped and anxious. It was my first time rooming with Solange, and one day I asked her why she seemed so calm while I was a wreck. I can tell you the remedy. You need some great closeness, one of those intense sessions that leave you breathless with pleasure. That might work for single women like you. I'm married. She smiled and showed me pictures on her phone of 2 little girls and a handsome man. My husband and kids. But you sleep with Jean-Luc? Yes, and if he's not available, I share a bed with Eric. Notice the hands, honey. No wedding rings allowed here. It's symbolic. No one's married here, and what happens in the country stays here. We return to our spouses and commit to them until we come back. I make sure to give my rings to my husband when I leave, and he puts them back on me as soon as I return. It's a reclaiming. Don't anyone get caught? One of the doctors did a couple of years ago. We're medical professionals, but she forgot her birth control. Then there was a shortage of protection, and despite trying other methods, she found out she was 2 months pregnant when she returned home. Her husband figured it out, and they ended up divorcing. The organization paid him off to keep quiet about it, and she was banned from serving again. What about diseases? She sighed. We're medical professionals, remember? We get tested monthly, and if something slips through, we handle it quickly. Trust me, no one will find out. I held on for 5 months, but losing a mother and child to an IED broke me. Despite my efforts, both passed, leaving me devastated. I drank heavily and woke up with a male nurse, Rodrigo, who initiated intimacy again, and I gave in. He stayed until his rotation ended 4 days later. I knew my husband would sense something, but he was still angry about me leaving. It took 4 months before we were intimate again. I have to admit, many times as my husband and I had closeness, I'd think back to the staying power of Rodrigo or the sheer size of Michelle. I tried to suppress those memories, but occasionally used a toy, crying out their names. A year later, things normalized. Then, the organization asked me to fill in for 3 months as an emergency replacement. I never told my husband it was because of a mortar shell. We argued for 3 days until he gave up. Do whatever you want. Just don't expect us to be here when you get back. I'm seeking custody. No judge will let Tommy live with you. I was shocked. It was only 13 weeks. I tried to reason with him, but he barely spoke to me until I left. Surprisingly, he drove me to the airport. I didn't do it for you. I did it for myself. Watching you walk away, knowing what you stand to lose, is something I need to see to get through the next few months. Things will be different when you return. Take your time. Whether it's a month, a year, or forever, it's fine. He turned away without another word, leaving me there. I knew he meant it. I knew if I wanted to salvage my family, I needed to act quickly. I resolved to fix things as soon as I returned and headed towards the ticket counter. Solange greeted me with a hug when I arrived at the site. If possible, it was even worse than the last place. I'm glad you're here. Don't bother unpacking. Get ready. We need you urgently. There had been a mortar attack on a village 40 miles away, and I was surprised at how many had survived long enough to reach the clinic. My team worked 11 hours straight without a break. About half of our patients would make it, which was decent given the circumstances. 5 passed on my operating table. After the 4th, I moved on to the next patient, while they removed the body and prepared for the next one. One of the losses was a 9-year-old girl. Her heart stopped as she cried out for her mother. I was completely emotionally numb. Solange led me to the communal shower and helped me clean up. Modesty faded fast in that environment. Time was short, so both men and women used the shower together. After a few times, even walking in on people having closeness in the shower stopped surprising me. I just moved to the other side and tried to ignore it. Later, Solange climbed into the bunk with me and held me while I cried myself to sleep. By the next week, I had adjusted. We talked about our past deployments and returning home. Solange looked happy when she mentioned reuniting with her partner and how she almost didn't join this mission. He's running out of patience, and I can't blame him. He let me go on 3 tours, and I think this one is the limit for me. How's your husband handling it? I remember he wasn't pleased last time. He says he's going to file for divorce and fight for custody, using my service here against me. I hope I can repair things when I get home, but it took him a long time to forgive me last time. Don't worry too much, hon. It's probably his worry about your safety speaking. He might keep a tight leash on you for a while, but he'll forgive you eventually. Just don't push your luck. The organization values what you've done, but at some point you have to prioritize yourself. I hope you're right. I'll do everything I can to make it right when I return, and I won't sign up for another tour. It's time for someone else to save the world. Then I smirked. So, who's keeping you warm in bed these days? She giggled like a schoolgirl. Gerard. He's from Algiers and quite skilled as a doctor, among other things. Are you getting involved? No, it's just a few weeks. I can handle it. As I sat on the plane, I strategized. There was no way I could go back to that life, so I needed to convince Brian completely that I was over everything and ready to be a devoted wife from now on. Solange advised me to win him back through our son, then she chuckled. It was harder than I expected. When I returned home, he wasn't there. My mother was taking care of our child and told me he said it was too good a chance to miss, and he'd be away for another 10 days. In a way, it was a blessing because it allowed me to focus on my son. Once I could win him back, everything else would fall into place smoothly. As I planned to rebuild my family, I later found out that Brian was in the organization's corporate offices, talking to the head psychiatrist. Thank you for your interest in our charity, Mr. Oliver. We appreciate any publicity we can get. Our work is crucial in providing essential services where they're most needed, though we've sadly lost team members over the years, which is a concern for prospective volunteers. Yes, it's definitely a worthwhile cause. Your organization's challenges are understated, but the risks are clear. I imagine you thoroughly assess volunteers' mental readiness before they join. We do. It's a noble cause, but it's mentally taxing. Some volunteers face breakdowns and PTSD. We offer comprehensive support for as long as needed. You seem to prioritize your team's well-being. Do many volunteers serve multiple tours? Some do, but we limit it to 4 tours and generally advise against it. 2 tours is typical. With all the stress they endure, how do they cope while on duty? They support each other, which helps boost morale and ease fears. I did some research on the high divorce rates among volunteers with multiple tours. What's your perspective on this issue? The doctor paused. Some struggle with the challenges and seek solace wherever they can, often to their detriment. We work to mend relationships affected by their service. So, are failed marriages and broken relationships seen as acceptable sacrifices? How do you justify this to the spouses left behind? uncertain about their future. I'm concerned about the direction of this interview. Stories like these could harm the organization's reputation. Yes, my research indicates that you prefer to keep these issues quiet and out of public view. I've uncovered at least 3 instances where substantial sums were paid to avoid exposure. Do your donors know their money is being used this way? The doctor stood up. I think we're done here, Mr. Oliver. I advise you to carefully consider the implications of what you're planning to write. Careers can be ruined by spreading such allegations. The man grinned, unsettling the doctor. I discovered that in my background checks, too. It's why I value my independence. I don't yield to pressure. He walked towards the door. Just as a heads up, look up Dr. Hope Oliver. I believe she has a history with your organization. He left, closing the door behind him. The doctor sighed heavily, sensing a personal vendetta in the man's actions. Being independent meant he might be difficult to influence. He instructed his assistant to gather information on Dr. Hope Oliver, realizing the situation could escalate quickly. He then called the CEO. I received a surprising phone call from the charity, and the caller was a high-ranking official. Dr. Oliver, we urgently need you to come to our headquarters as soon as possible. It's very important. Why now? It's a bad time for me to leave home. My husband is away on assignment, and I'm taking care of our son full-time. Plus, I've resumed my duties at the hospital with surgeries lined up, and if you haven't read my file, you should know. I won't be returning to service. It was fulfilling. But my priority is now my family. My husband wasn't supportive of my work. Your husband is why we're calling. He visited yesterday and made troubling remarks. They could damage our reputation. We're trying to manage the situation, and it's in your best interest to come see us. I felt my blood drain. Brian was relentless once he got wind of something. Doctors and nurses gossip a lot, and if word got out about my overseas work, it could be disastrous for many people. After hanging up, I immediately called Solange and shared what had been said. I had praised Brian's skills as a journalist. We even watched him on CNN in France before leaving. God, this could be a disaster. My husband wouldn't forgive me easily. You have to contact your husband, Hope. Beg him, promise anything to stop him. Think of the others. Most of us are married. This could blow up across 3 continents. I tried calling Brian multiple times. All went to voicemail. He didn't respond to emails or texts. I was lost. I rearranged my schedule, citing a family emergency, which it was to me, and flew to New York. I arrived at their headquarters by 9 in the morning. Dr. Parkins, who evaluated me before I could start, met me at reception and took me straight to his office. After exchanging greetings, he quickly moved on to the reason for my visit. Your husband appears to have anger issues, doctor. I need to ask you some tough questions. I guarantee that what we discuss here stays confidential. It's crucial you're honest if any of us are to handle this situation. Are you prepared? I nodded, bracing myself for what was to come. Did you have intimate relations with any colleagues during your assignments? If so, who? Were you cautious? Did you avoid public displays? And did you discuss work matters outside the organization? I listed my 2 long-term partners and 2 others from a brief fling. Dr. Parkins remained expressionless, leaving me curious about his thoughts once I finished. Thank you for being candid. Truthfully, while this is not uncommon, the rates are similar to those in healthcare outside of these intense settings. I've assisted many dealing with this issue, and my advice is consistent. Follow your conscience. 95% keep it secret, and confessing rarely ends well. He paused, looking deep in thought before continuing. But this situation isn't ordinary. Based on my conversation with your husband, I'm fairly certain he knows about your affairs while you were abroad, and he's furious. Angry people aren't typically rational. In previous cases like this, we managed to contain them, but that won't happen here. We can apply pressure on CNN, but we're powerless against his personal platform. He can be as explicit as he wants, and there's little we can do. This could cause significant harm. How many spouses will remain supportive once this story breaks? We need their support. If you have any influence over your husband, now's the time to use it. My response didn't satisfy him. Sir, I don't know where my husband is or what he's doing right now. He's cut off all communication with me. Who knows what he might do? The next day we found out. It was splashed across the New York newspapers and went global. 48 spouses filed a class action lawsuit against the charity, blaming it for destroying their marriages and long-term relationships over the past 6 years. They sought millions in compensation. The lawsuit was filed internationally in courts in France, England, Italy, Algeria, the US, and Canada. The charity found him determined and extremely angry, refusing to cooperate. They tried to reason with him until he revealed he had recordings of every meeting and phone call since he started investigating. He knew he was protected by state laws and more, and even if he didn't use them in court, he could on his own platform. Recent veterans' spouses were demanding answers from their partners, many of whom didn't believe what they heard. Less reputable newspapers seized on the scandal, reveling in closeness and controversy. There seemed to be no shortage of material. Social media dubbed us #doctors without morals, and the mainstream media adopted it as the official narrative. Brian was portrayed as the whistleblower, and it directly implicated me. Media outlets from around the world bombarded me with interview requests, all of which I steadfastly refused. It occurred to me that speaking out might be a way to reach Brian, but I never got the chance. He eventually returned home, ignoring me completely and spending most of his time with our son. When I asked him for a way to contact him in emergencies, he showed me a disposable phone and gave me the number. If you ever call for anything other than our son, I'll get rid of it. The first time he came to pick up Tommy from my mom's house, I waited for him on the steps. Brian, we need to talk. I need to explain things and help you understand. What happened overseas is completely separate from us. It didn't affect our lives and meant nothing once I returned home. He stared at me for a moment. Let me ask you something. While you were happily involved over there, did you ever think about how it would affect our marriage? Would you forgive me if I had multiple affairs while you were away and said they meant nothing because you weren't here? It's not the same. Bullcrap. This conversation is over. Bring Tommy out so I can leave. Something here makes me sick. After that, he stopped speaking to me. If I tried to talk to him, he would just stare until our son came out. Tommy was now living with his dad full time. The courts decided he should stay there since it was familiar and comfortable for him. The judge also allowed him to live in our house until the matter was settled because he was the primary caregiver. I rented a small apartment near the hospital. It was just a basic place, quite different from the house with the large yard we had bought 5 years earlier. Brian didn't have to work as much as I did, so he became a part-time stay-at-home dad. He worked during Tommy's naps and later when he was in school. He redesigned the backyard, adding a fence, sandbox, swing set, and a big above-ground pool where they spent many summer hours. I think I used it only twice in 5 years. I came home one day to see 3 girls frolicking in our pool. I was really pissed, but Brian grinned at me. I still have to work, you know. I could probably work at night while you took care of him, but do you really want to come home to the demands of a 6-year-old after a long day? This way is better. Kimberly is highly qualified as a sitter, so I hired her. The other 2 are just friends. Part of the employment agreement was use of the pool a couple of days a week. She can have 2 friends at a time with her and no more, and no boys. Tommy loves her. She's really good with him, and I get to work. She's never in the pool while she's working, unless it's with Tommy. She's teaching him to swim. Isn't that great? I understood his point, but it still bothered me. You're okay working with girls right in front of you? Sprites? What have you been reading? My office is on the other side of the house. I might catch a glimpse if I stand up from my desk and strain to look out the window. Otherwise, I come out here like I am now, to tell them it's getting late and they need to go home. Tommy woke up from his nap and ran into my arms. Then he pulled me over to meet the girls so I could meet Miss Kimmy. As I talked with them, I started to relax, and when Kim told me she was starting a nursing program in the fall, we found common ground. I helped her get a volunteer position at the hospital and mentored her as much as I could, even writing her a strong recommendation letter for college. Kim was doing well in her 2nd year. Her younger sister Alexis, Miss Lexi, took over, and Tommy loved her almost as much as Kim. I had a sense they provided a lot of care while I was away. The charity wanted to settle the class action lawsuit with a non-disclosure agreement. They updated me on the negotiations. Brian's laughter didn't sit well with their lawyers. Everyone else has agreed. Why can't you move on? One of the attorneys asked. I have moved on, Brian replied, but I haven't forgiven her or your organization. I know how hard you recruited her, promising how good it would look on her resume and possibly lead to consulting opportunities later. I'm still investigating, trying to understand how you operate. In other cases, the victims were paid off, sometimes with money, sometimes with business deals. I don't need the money, and there's no way I'd work with you guys. Now I'm in the middle of my 2nd piece on your organization, and I've set my own deadline, so leave me alone. They stood to leave, and just before they exited, the youngest lawyer, a woman who had graduated from law school 3 years ago, posed a question to him. Isn't your anger misplaced? After all, it was your wife who caused this. She cheated on you. I understand, and I'm sorry. Shouldn't you be making her life a living hell instead of ours? He smiled at her, which unsettled her. Then he showed her a picture of his son. This is my son. He's the reason I haven't completely retaliated against my wife. Without him, I would have unleashed my full fury on her immediately after she returned from her last trip. Maybe my anger is misdirected, but over the years, your organization must have known these things were happening. You even have protocols written on how to handle a spouse's anger. You calculated the impact on your organization and decided some collateral damage was acceptable. Apparently, that was true until I came along. I must be your organization's worst nightmare. I have my own income, so you can't threaten my job. I earn enough money so you can't financially ruin me, and I have enough rage to ignore any veiled threats. You can leave now. She looked pale as she walked away. The intense anger emanating from the man was enough to unsettle her. I wasn't surprised when I received the divorce papers. Every legal step I took ended in frustration. I made it a point to visit his house so frequently that he obtained a restraining order against me. If I came within 100 feet of him or his house, I could be arrested. My employers were unhappy with the chaos my personal life had caused. Despite no evidence of wrongdoing at work, the administrator called me in. I'm speaking on behalf of the board. Your personal issues are becoming a distraction. We hold you in high regard as a skilled surgeon. This isn't official, just a request to see if you can calm things down with your husband. Please, Sarah. I promised to try my best, even though I couldn't talk to him directly. He said I could email if necessary. That night, I spent 5 hours crafting an email. After sending it, I hoped for a response before going to bed. The next morning, I cringed at his reply. I don't care about your career or this hospital unless it affects our son. If you catch me lying, let me know and I'll retract it. Several people from your hospital have been on missions for the organization. I might look into that. You should warn them. Well, that didn't help. I showed the email to the administrator. He sighed and reacted strongly. Damn it, Sarah, this is serious. I'll need to bring those people in and warn them. It might create tension since you work closely with them. Patient care can't suffer, so finish the day and then take a week off to try to sort this out. Good luck, Sarah. Well, that message was pretty clear. Either fix this mistake or start looking for a new hospital. My boss conducted interviews and I received some interesting phone calls. 3 technicians, 2 nurses, and a doctor had gotten involved romantically while on a mission. 2 of them were in relationships and brought their affairs home with them. Now, 6 people were facing a tough decision. Should they confess now and hope for forgiveness, or stay quiet and deny everything? I hope they all chose to stay silent because if one confessed, it could lead to a chain reaction. I found out about all this later. At the time, I was focused on a mission of my own. I had my lawyer request a meeting with Brian's lawyer. If they agreed, I would sign the divorce papers. I'd finally accepted that my marriage was beyond repair, especially when only one person was willing to try. I was surprised when they agreed. 3 days before our scheduled meeting, Brian published a harsh essay criticizing doctors and their God complex. He had done thorough research and consulted experts, making his points accurate. A noted psychologist mentioned that this complex was present in almost all successful people to some extent, regardless of their profession. But it was more pronounced in medicine due to the life and death nature of the work. Brian discussed how this sense of entitlement could affect behavior, which made me reflect deeply. I saw a lot of my own actions mirrored in the essay. Had I truly become that arrogant? Did I believe my profession exempted me from normal rules? Had I justified my actions by compartmentalizing my life? The answer to all these questions was yes. I was frustrated during those missions, but I could have chosen not to have closeness with anyone, or I could have stayed home altogether. Instead, I convinced myself that it was just a way to relieve stress and wouldn't affect my marriage. I thought I deserved it to stay sane, and believed what happened away from home wouldn't matter. After reflecting on it, I realized I missed the excitement of new partners and might have cheated again if I had the chance and felt safe. It was a wake-up call. The meeting went better than expected. There were a few minor issues to sort out, but we handled them quickly. Brian would have primary custody of our son, which was already the arrangement, but I would have generous visitation rights. Our incomes were similar, so neither of us would pay alimony, and instead of child support, I agreed to contribute to a college fund for our son. Overall, the agreement was fair. Brian wanted the house, so instead of selling him my share, I transferred ownership to him and suggested he put the money he would have paid me into our son's college fund. He appreciated that gesture. Looking at Brian, I felt a pang of regret. We had been good partners. Despite our arguments, we always resolved our differences and never fought in front of our child. That changed when I decided to go on those missions. My therapist, yes, I had one who was helping me avoid repeating mistakes in future relationships, which seemed wise, helped me realize that was when I started focusing on myself rather than being part of a couple. Brian wasn't perfect. He could be distant and moody, especially when he was upset about something, but he tried to keep it under control. Before I went on my first mission, he fully supported my career, but things changed when I returned. He seemed indifferent. If I had a conflict in my schedule, it was no longer his concern. That's when he sensed our relationship was deteriorating, and he started protecting himself. Once the legal formalities were done and the lawyers left, we sat down in the conference room and had a real conversation, something we hadn't done since before my first mission. It struck me that it had been a long time since we had talked like that. This will be the last time I apologize to you, Brian. Looking back, I regret ever getting on that plane. At the time, I was so focused on myself, so entitled. Now I realize I was making decisions without considering you and our son. Sadly, any decisions I make now will be without either of you. Not necessarily. We still have our son, and he'll keep us connected for at least the next 15 years, through college and beyond. Then we'll have weddings to plan and arguments over grandkids, so we'll always be a part of each other's lives. His words made me smile through tears, but it was overwhelming, so I gave Brian what would probably be our final kiss, and left. I'm not sure if the divorce or our conversation eased his mind, but he eased up on his involvement with the organization. I know they settled the class action lawsuit for a hefty sum, which significantly boosted Tommy's college fund. The stress became too much, so I switched hospitals and moved across town to our biggest competitor. Management said the right things, but I could tell they were relieved I was leaving. Some of the people who had been on past missions had marriage troubles, but fortunately, only one ended in divorce, even though a few other relationships are strained. I didn't date for almost a year. When I did start going out again, I was cautious and didn't get into a serious relationship for another year. That ended when I found out he didn't want kids and couldn't tolerate being around them. Another year and a half passed before I found love. He was also a doctor, a pediatrician, and he adored children. We took things slowly. Both of us had been divorced recently, so we were careful not to rush into anything. It turned out to be a good approach because we really got to know each other before getting serious. Brian stayed single too, although he was seeing a producer from CNN, and their relationship seemed to be getting serious. Tommy liked her, and she had two cute little girls who adored him whenever they were together. The network was pressuring Brian to commit to them exclusively. He wasn't enthusiastic about it, and I knew if they didn't ease up, he'd leave when his contract expired in 4 months. MSNBC and Fox were both trying to recruit him, so he wouldn't be off the air for long. One afternoon, I was passing through the neighborhood and decided to see if Tommy wanted to go to the local ice cream parlor with me. It was a quaint shop that made their own ice cream. They didn't have a huge selection, just a dozen flavors that changed with the seasons, using local fruit whenever possible. It was peach season, my favorite flavor. I'd bring a small cooler and stock up on quarts of peach ice cream whenever I visited. I almost didn't pull into the driveway when I saw Brian's car there, but I was already signaling and Tommy noticed me. He dashed off the front porch, smiling widely with his two little companions right behind him. Brian and Alicia were sitting on the swing, and they waved as I approached. I bent down to hug Tommy, and then the tiny 4-year-old girl opened her arms for a hug too. I could have backed away, but instead I grinned and scooped her and her 6-year-old sister up into a big hug. When I finished, the little one stayed in my arms, so I carried her with me. Brian had a slight grin on his face, while Alicia seemed unsure of what to say. "Hi there, I'm Sarah. Let's make a deal. I'll trade you a 10-year-old boy, slightly used for these cuties. Maybe I'll even throw in a pony." Alicia grinned back. "A pony, huh? Let me think about that. I'm Martha, but everyone calls me Marty." "Sarah, I can't tell you what they call me in less polite settings, but it rhymes with witch." "Sarah it is, then." I turned and hugged Tommy again. "I have to run, honey. I was just passing by and thought about getting ice cream, but I see you're busy. We'll do it another time." I had forgotten I still had the 4-year-old in my arms, and she started tugging on my hair. "Want ice cream?" "You'll have to ask Mommy about that." I tried to put her down, but she resisted. Want ice cream? It looks like I'm stuck, Marty. How about we go get some ice cream? There's a great place just down the street with the best homemade flavors. It's peach season right now, which happens to be my favorite. My treat? Marty grinned and stood up, giving Brian a quick kiss on the cheek. I'll be back in about 45 minutes. Why don't you get everything ready for the grill? We decided to walk, and the sight of Brian with his mouth hanging open made me smile as we headed to the shop. Taylor clung tightly to me, reminding me how much effort it took to carry a little one around. We warned them to behave or they wouldn't get any ice cream, and they fell in line. Taylor changed her mind several times before settling on blueberry. Tanya carefully considered all the flavors before choosing banana. I picked peach, and after the server gave her a taste, Marty chose peach too. Tommy knew all the flavors and chose vanilla. The girls tasted everyone else's choices and decided peach was really good and that's what they'd have next time. They managed to stay surprisingly neat and clean considering the circumstances, and it was a happy group of kids walking back. Marty carried Taylor even though she protested, so Tanya held tight to my hand. When we got back, I told them I had to leave. I received nice sticky kisses and a good hug from my son before I departed, smiling. Marty seemed like a good match for Brian, and he had always wanted more children. It looked like he was moving up in the world. Marty called me unexpectedly, asking to meet for lunch. I had to think about it for a moment, knowing she wanted to discuss Brian. Eventually, I made up my mind. Can you come by the hospital around noon? We'll have to eat in the cafeteria, but the food there is surprisingly good. That works for me. Noon it is? I'll see you there. Marty was much smaller than me, but exuded the confident manner of someone successful in her field. We chose our food and sat down, making small talk as we ate. Pushing her tray away, she grinned. Brian and I are getting married. I wanted to tell you myself. It's not to rub anything in your face. Your past is your own, but you're still connected to him through Tommy. I thought it would be best to talk in person. If you're comfortable, could you share with me what went wrong in your marriage? I know Brian can get absorbed in his work at times, but he's the kindest man I've ever known. Grateful for my years of therapy, I could be honest now. In short, I started to think I was more important than Brian. I respected his brilliance in his work, but as a doctor, I felt my role was crucial. I became arrogant. Brian preferred home life while I enjoyed going out and the attention my looks and skills brought. I began making decisions on my own, believing I knew better for our family. It wasn't about family decisions. It became, what does Sarah want? I made many mistakes. Doctors International was the final straw. Although even when Brian warned he'd leave if I went again, I believed I could win him back. You know how that turned out? If I could go back, would I change things knowing what I know now? Probably, but it wouldn't have lasted. Ultimately, I left, knowing the consequences, had affairs while away, and expected everything to be fine upon my return. It was a harsh wake-up call when it wasn't. It shattered my self-image as someone above societal norms. In the end, I changed jobs, lost my son and husband, and nothing I gained was worth what I lost. She sat quietly for a moment, taking in what I had just shared, then let out a sigh. I've encountered situations like yours before, though not personally. I've worked with many high-profile personalities and experienced their arrogance firsthand. One of them even demanded favors right before going on air. We were in his office, and he dropped his pants, saying, "Nothing relaxes me on screen like a good BJ." I chuckled, imagining the scene. I grabbed his balls and pulled hard. He screamed like a child. I brought him to his knees and leaned in close, whispering, "If you ever try this again with me or any other woman here, I'll finish what I started." He nodded weakly. Just when he thought I would release him, I pulled down harder and slapped him across the face. The red mark stayed for hours. They had to find someone else to host the show. Management threatened me, but I had recorded the whole incident. I told them if it affected my career, I'd sell the story to their biggest competitor. 6 months later, they didn't renew his contract. She glanced down at her nails, then grinned as she looked back up at me. So you see, I understand what a God complex is all about. More importantly, I know how to navigate around people like that and handle the ones I can't avoid. I'm glad you've learned from your mistakes, and I'm sorry it led to your divorce, but I'm also glad it brought me the man of my dreams. Does that make sense to you? It did. I shared the conversation with my new partner that evening while we cooked dinner together. It had become our routine. If one of us arrived home much earlier than the other, we might cook alone, but we preferred preparing meals together. It was our way to unwind, discuss our days, and let go of the stress from work. This left us time for the important things, like cuddling while watching movies or listening to music, and if we wanted, just cuddling. My relationship with the pediatrician ended badly after I accidentally stumbled upon disturbing content on his laptop. Mine had crashed, so I used his to send an urgent email about a surgery. I noticed a folder named Sarah and opened it, expecting personal photos. Instead, I found numerous pictures of myself, mostly without clothes, some while I was asleep, but mostly during intimate moments. He had used multiple cameras to capture these scenes for his private collection. There were also photos of me in the shower and even using the bathroom. Disgusted, I dug deeper and found a folder labeled Candyland containing more disturbing and explicit material. I barely made it to the kitchen sink before vomiting. After rinsing my mouth and brushing my teeth, I immediately took the laptop to the nearest police station. Two detectives, one male and one female, reviewed the files for about 30 seconds before taking the matter seriously and interrupting the district attorney's dinner. After hearing my report, he instructed me to return the laptop to the pediatrician's house while they obtained a search warrant. I called to report what I had found on my way back. When I returned to his house, he was anxiously pacing. He noticed his laptop in my hands, realized what I had discovered, and reacted violently. He punched me so hard in the nose that it broke, and I lost consciousness just as someone rang the doorbell. He dashed out the rear door, clutching his laptop, only to run straight into two hefty policemen, both married with kids. They interpreted his attempt to flee as resisting arrest and took forceful action, leaving him with deep bruises and taser burns. After the trial concluded, he received a 15-year sentence. Evidence surfaced of him grooming one of his patients, leading to a lawsuit by the girl's parents that stripped him of his assets, leaving him penniless. In prison, where kid offenders are often targeted, he fared poorly, suffering permanent injuries within his first year, blindness in one eye and a lasting limp. Returning to my therapist, I grappled with the realization that I couldn't have foreseen his crimes. He had never hinted at any inappropriate behavior with minors, aside from expressing a desire to have children of his own someday. Back then, his words had given me hope, but now I shuddered at the memory. "He seemed so successful, Sarah, and hid it well for years," my therapist consoled me. "Everyone was shocked when the truth came out. Perhaps fate or divine intervention led you to discover that computer. And remember, dear, there are plenty of good men out there. One day one will find you. I'm sure of it." I had a good man once, I reflected sadly, and I ruined it. Perhaps being single now is my penance for my mistakes. 9 months later, I met Jeremiah. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a captivating smile and the kindest eyes I had ever seen. A touch of gray peppered his temples and beard, but the strength in his muscles belied his age. I encountered him at a convention, sent there by my hospital for networking and recruitment purposes. My troubled past had faded, and I had made significant contributions to my new workplace, earning recognition as one of their prominent figures in the community. While the rules for job applications typically considered various factors, nothing was set in stone initially, and we were seeking fresh talent. At 35, I was the youngest surgeon on staff, and the hospital was eager for new perspectives. The symposium covered a wide range of medical topics, and I decided to look up Jeremiah. I was surprised by what I found. He owned an insurance company specializing in healthcare, was a certified public accountant, and a registered nurse practitioner. He held 5 degrees in different fields and had an exceptionally high IQ. His workshop on malpractice scared all of us until he guided us through steps to avoid lawsuits. He was funny, clear, and quick with a joke to lighten the mood, but his closing remarks grabbed everyone's attention. "Mistakes happen. When they do, own up to them. Trying to cover up your errors only makes things worse if the truth comes out later. It damages your reputation and makes juries unsympathetic. Plus, it gives the public a bad view of doctors as greedy and incompetent. There's a movement to cap malpractice awards, and I've helped develop a complex algorithm that some states are considering. Until then, remember, the worse your behavior, the bigger the payout. I'll be around for questions the rest of the conference. Thank you." His talk received a lot of positive feedback, and doctors crowded around him 3 deep. I gave up trying to talk to him and hurried to my next seminar. I didn't see him again until later that night, when I slipped into what I thought was an empty conference room to avoid another doctor who had a bit too much to drink and was acting like he was God's gift to women. I had to hide or risk slapping him, which wouldn't have been good for business. I nearly jumped when Jeremiah's voice broke the silence. "Hiding from your demons?" Recognizing him, I smiled. "Just one, I'm afraid. And you?" I needed a break. For all the time doctors spend in school, some are surprisingly clueless about the real world. You don't have to tell me. As a doctor, I've made my fair share of dumb decisions, but I'm proud to say none of them involved a patient. Well then, you're ahead of the game. We chatted pleasantly for the next 15 minutes. Suddenly, the door swung open, and there he was, Dr. Dick. There you are. What are you up to? Well, I was just about to have some fun with this guy, I joked. But you've crashed the party. Go away. We were getting to the good part. He swayed a bit, trying to process what I said through his alcohol haze. He was about to retort when Jeremiah stood up, towering over him. Leave now, unless you want to stick around and watch. Maybe you can enjoy yourself while I take care of business with this babe. Dr. Dick opened and closed his mouth a few times, muttered something under his breath, and then staggered out. Jeremiah and I looked at each other and burst into laughter. Once we settled down, we resumed our conversation, sticking to safe topics. When we said goodbye, I gave him a kiss on the cheek, and he hugged me warmly. The next morning, we bumped into each other at breakfast. He gestured for me to join him, and we agreed to have lunch after our respective seminars and workshops. Dinner was lovely. He took me to a quiet restaurant away from the conference hustle. Later, we went to a cozy club where the music wasn't too loud, and we danced a few slow songs. Despite being tall, I felt small and comfortable in his arms. Back at the hotel, he walked me to my room and gave me a sweet kiss. Not too intense, but filled with promise. It left me wanting more. As our relationship progressed, we discovered we were both from the same city. He had been married before, but tragically lost his wife during childbirth due to an unknown condition. They miraculously saved the baby, who spent almost 2 months in the hospital and was now 7 years old. About 3 months into our relationship, after we became intimate, I shared my story with him. He listened quietly, holding me while I cried, afraid that he might want to end things. His response melted my heart. You can't change what happened before. It seems like you made a lot of mistakes, but at least you've learned from them. If I didn't trust you, we wouldn't be where we are now. I tried to spoil him with love, but thankfully it didn't work out that way. By the end of the weekend, he was pretty tired. We continued to take things slow, but gradually I started spending more and more time at his place. I was incredibly nervous when I introduced him to my son, but they hit it off immediately. Jerry was really skilled at archery, and he got Tommy interested in it after talking to my ex-husband. He didn't say much about their meeting, just that he seemed like a decent guy. Then one day, I came home to find the house full of kids, Tommy and his 2 little sisters, all 3 of them. Brian and Marty had a child together, an exceptionally bright little girl who seemed wise beyond her years. I raised an eyebrow, and Jerry blushed a bit before grinning. We're managing this bunch for a couple of days while Marty heads to New York to accept an award. Her career is taking off now that she's the executive producer of Brian's new show. CNN convinced Brian to host a 1-hour show 3 days a week, alternating with another show. The ratings were solid and improving. His only request during negotiations was for his wife to manage the show, and the network agreed immediately. Marty did such a great job that the show won an Emmy, and Brian couldn't hide his pride in his wife. He even spoke passionately about how much he loved her on one of his shows, much to her embarrassment. I couldn't resist and watched his show, feeling a pang of regret when I realized that if things had been different, if I had stayed faithful and kept my ego in check, he might have been praising me on air. Then I looked at Jerry and wondered if he was the person I was destined to be with all along. What was supposed to be 2 days turned into 3 when they asked for an extra day. Jerry was thrilled. The older girls wanted to try out Terry's bow, but he was a teenager, and the bow was too big for them. Jerry solved that by taking them to Academy, buying them smaller bows and all the necessary gear. Taylor took to it naturally, and Tanya showed some promise. Lucy, Jerry's daughter, was a big help. Then Tina wanted a bow, and I intervened, getting her one of those toy bows with suction cups instead of arrows. She did surprisingly well for a 3-year-old, but I regretted my decision every time I had to peel an arrow off the TV screen, the patio door, or a car window. Jeremiah and the kids found it hilarious. I was utterly exhausted, yet filled with joy. At first, Lucy was hesitant, not wanting to share her dad with anyone else. But gradually she warmed up to me, and we became close. I poured out all the love I couldn't give to my son onto her, and she thrived. Having girls her age around for days lifted her spirits, and there were lots of hugs and kisses as they departed. We were lounging on the couch when Lucy crawled on top of us. After settling in, she said something that completely surprised me. "Mom, can I have a little sister?" It was the first time she called me Mom, and tears streamed down my face as I embraced her. When I could speak, I kissed her on the head. That depends, sweetheart. What does Daddy think about that? Daddy was grinning, holding up a small box. Daddy thinks it's the best idea he's heard in a long time. I cried for 30 minutes, hugging and kissing both of them the whole time. I was getting a bit older to have a baby, but sheer determination paid off, and I gave birth to an 8-pound boy 2 weeks before my 38th birthday. The waiting room was packed. I was a well-liked doctor, and the nurses doted on me. Seeing Brian, Marty, and their kids wasn't surprising, but I was taken aback to see Brian's mother there. She'd moved away for a while, and I didn't know she was back. Tears welled up as she asked to hold her newest granddaughter. Soon, Jeremiah's mom and she were deep in conversation, planning out the futures of all the kids. Lucy made sure she was the first to hold her brother after her parents. She was a bit disappointed he was a boy, but that changed as soon as she saw his face. When he was 5 and she was 13, if he got fussy, she'd scoop him up and cover him in kisses. He'd giggle and try to wipe them off as quickly as she planted them. One of the biggest pictures on her nightstand is the one of her holding her brother for the first time. I was 53 years old, the respected elder of the surgical unit. Knowing my hands would soon no longer manage the job, I began planning my retirement. Younger doctors and nurses saw me as a mother figure and often confided in me. One of the nurses, considered one of the prettier ones, sought my advice. I heard you worked with Doctors International. I've been offered an opportunity to join. Do you have any advice? I didn't mince words, sharing my own experiences and the sacrifices it entailed. She was newly married, so I asked if her husband supported the idea. He doesn't know yet. In that case, you should discuss it with him. Are you ready to be apart from him for that long? Will he be patient, waiting for you to return? The organization does important work, but there are always drawbacks and sacrifices. Think carefully before you decide. In the end, she decided not to go, and someone else took her place. She broke up with her boyfriend before leaving, but he was engaged by the time she returned, shattering any hopes of reconciliation. We suspected she might have ended things preemptively, perhaps anticipating the possibility of having a fling while away, but we never expected him to move on so quickly. She seemed subdued for about 4 months, and when they offered her another assignment, she declined. Tommy graduated with a master's in journalism and took a job as an associate producer for Fox. Lucy was a junior in a pre-med program. Tanya is in the same program, and they are roommates. Taylor is a senior and has a full ride scholarship for volleyball. Tina is a freshman in high school and seems to be majoring in boys. At 14, she looks 20, and men and boys alike make fools of themselves over her. She has a good head on her shoulders, and if they push hard, she shows them pictures of her and her sisters, brother, her cousins Lucy and JJ, all holding ribbons and trophies for archery and karate. Tommy was an alternate for the Olympic team last year, and JJ is already a second-degree black belt at 15. Lucy was state champion in archery for her age group 2 years ago, barely beating out her cousin Taylor. Tommy earned a master's degree in journalism and started working as an assistant producer at Fox. Lucy was a junior in a pre-med program, and her roommate Tanya was also in the same program. Taylor, a senior, had a full scholarship for volleyball. Tina, a high school freshman, seemed more interested in boys than anything else. She was grounded, though, and if anyone got too forward, she'd show them photos of herself with her siblings, cousins Lucy and JJ, all holding trophies from their achievements in archery and karate. Tommy narrowly missed making the Olympic team last year, while 15-year-old JJ already had a second-degree black belt. Lucy had won the state archery championship for her age group 2 years ago, narrowly beating her cousin Taylor. One day, I bumped into Brian at a coffee shop and we sat down together. I apologized once more for my behavior, but he brushed it off. That's all in the past. Let's leave it there. Instead, we jokingly complained about our kids and spouses for 30 minutes, shared a quick kiss, and then went our separate ways. As I watched him walk away down the sidewalk, I thought about the saying that cheaters never prosper. In my case, though, I knew it wasn't true. Yes, I had done something terrible out of arrogance and a sense of entitlement, and I did suffer the consequences for a long time. But ultimately, I believe that the pain I went through made me a better person. I hoped that growth showed in my marriage and relationships with those I cared about. When I mentored younger people at work, I shared my story, hoping it would make a positive impact. I smiled as I touched the envelope in my pocket. It was my present to my husband for our upcoming anniversary, a 2-week stay at a very exclusive resort in Thailand. There would be sun, sand, and an option to go without clothes. Even though I didn't have the super fit body I had in my 30s, I still worked out and was considered one of the top 3 attractive moms at my hospital. Jeremiah still saw me as a hot young woman, and I hoped he'd always feel that way. So, I endured the challenges and tried not to think about how time and nature were affecting me, especially when some of that aging was because of him.